Hey everyone, it's Austin Solomon. Welcome to this week's episode of the Real Wausau Real Estate Show. Today I'm here with Justin Bates. We're talking about the tactical ways to buy a foreclosure in the Wausau area. This episode was so good that I honestly for a second was going to hesitate to even launch it and just keep the information for myself, and implement on buying a foreclosure. But as most of you guys know, there is no shortage of information. There is just a lack of implementation. So you guys are going to love this episode. We're talking about how to buy a foreclosure and tactical steps to do so. Justin Bates and I rock this conversation. Let's get right into it.
Bit of a tale of woe for anybody who's out there to pivot slightly. If you are one of the people that like to go to sheriff sales, if you're one of the 30 people that call my office, the Monday before a sheriff sale, and by the way, I don't share bids. So if you're going to call my office looking to see what we're about to bid, don't, please.
Yep.
Just show up. And I'll be happy to let you know what my first bid is when we're there. But the issue with that is if you don't do your homework as a buyer at a foreclosure sale, there could be $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 worth of taxes out there. And step one is if you're interested in a property, check online. It's very easy to do. And I'm sure a lot of people that do this commercially do it all the time.
Yep.
Check online, make sure that there's not a ton of outstanding property taxes, or if there are, it's in a risk that you're willing to accept, and you change your bid price accordingly. That's kind of step one and two. That's the most important thing. The other is, and this one gets a little tricky. Normally, it's the holder of the mortgage, the lender, the mortgagee, is in first position, meaning their funds that they provided the borrower are probably the funds that were used to purchase the property. If not, it was a refi. But usually it's the person in first position or the lender in first position. But every once in a while, somebody gets a purchase money mortgage for, say, $150,000, or puts 30% down, and 2 years later goes and takes out a line of credit, home equity line of credit, we call it a HELOC, and goes out and takes a HELOC for $30,000 and secures it in second position, meaning that person who gave them that second loan may be from a different financial institution, who is now accepting payments separately. If those payments stop, that lender can also foreclose. And under the Wisconsin statutes, not only is the senior lender, the person or entity who provided the purchase money funding, not required to be a party in that lawsuit, they're actually not supposed to be and can get out if they are named. So a buyer at a sheriff's sale could look at, and the numbers, you could look at the numbers and maybe kind of figure it out if you're savvy enough. But sometimes the numbers are close enough to where the HELOC winds up being close to what that purchase money might have been, depending on how much you had down. So you don't know all of those variables. So you could show up to a sheriff's sale, buy property, think you got a great deal, and then all of a sudden turns out, there's a first position mortgage on here for another $100,000.
Wow.
And now that you're not financially liable for that money, but they can foreclose on that property even after you've bought it, and you'll lose everything that you paid to the second.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's no recourse against a junior lender in that situation or lien holder. You're just out of luck.
Yeah.
You're out of luck. I have had calls like that occasionally. It's usually from the person who doesn't do this commercially. Says, hey, that house I've had my eye on for a long time. I was Googling and I noticed it's going to be going to foreclosure sale. Well, how can you walk me through this process? How would I do that? When can I get in to see it is always the question I get. And I go, after you buy it. Unless you want to go ring the doorbell and ask the people who are about to be shoved out if it's cool if you look around. Most people aren't going to want to do that.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
So you're buying it sight unseen as is. There's no representations. There's no warranties. So you can do as much of your homework as you can at the courthouse and online. But outside of that, you're taking a bit of a flyer. And so, being armed with as much information as possible is very good. That's when you can go to a title company and you can say, hey, this is what I want to do. What kind of product can you provide me? And for a couple $100, you could find out what kind of situation you're about to be in.
Right.
It might be worth the investment.
For sure. So that would be like in our industry, and we're going to transition here. I think if it's good with you, let's transition into how to buy a foreclosure.
Sure.
Is that good?
Yeah.
Man, this is really good. I'm learning a lot of stuff here. This is awesome. So, because people ask me this all the time too. So, people will ask, hey, Austin, I saw a pre-foreclosure on Zillow, right? Like, we'd like to take a look at it, right? So, And on our end, I'm thinking the same thing that you're thinking is, hey, this person's about to get shoved out of their house. They don't necessarily want to sell the house, and they probably owe more than what it's worth. That's why they're, going through a foreclosure, and they don't just sell it, right?
So there's lots of, I've seen all sorts of reasons for why someone's going through a foreclosure. Obviously, it's an unfortunate situation.
Right.
Everybody assumes that either you're underwater or you're overextended. And those two certainly can play in. Being underwater, meaning owing more on your house than what it's worth, is something that we saw a lot more in, 08, 09, 10, 11. We don't see that quite as much anymore. Lending practices tightened as a result of additional federal regulations.
Yep.
And we haven't seen, although I think there may have been a small bubble building, prior to our COVID situation that we find ourselves in, but not anything close to what was building previously.
Yep.
And so what I would tell people is a foreclosure is probably happening. Divorce.
Yep.
Certainly can lead to foreclosure, where a court has ordered one of the parties to either refinance it, sell it, or make the payments. And a court can order that all day long, and everybody can have the best intentions in the world, but reality will dictate that. Mm-hmm. You can't just walk into a lender and say, hey, the court told me I need to refinance this, so I'd like to refinance this. They say, great, let me take a look at your situation. And especially if you just got divorced, there's a real good chance that you won't qualify, unfortunately. So divorce can lead to those. Death can lead to those.
Yeah.
And, where there's not, the heirs all have houses and don't have any interest in moving into mom or dad's old house. So, and there's a mortgage on the property, and so there's not going to be any equity, so they really just don't do anything with it, and it eventually goes through the foreclosure process. The foreclosure process also will happen a lot of times because there are junior liens on the property. So it may not necessarily be a HELOC like we talked about earlier. It could be a credit card that took a judgment against you. It could be medical debt. It could be things that maybe could have been wiped out in say, a bankruptcy, but weren't because the person didn't file one. So as a result, there's a lot of reasons why foreclosures happen when they may not otherwise be necessary.
Yep.
Because of a lot of extraneous circumstances. But what I would say is that, yes, if you see a house in pre-foreclosure on Zillow, in Wisconsin, what that usually means is we're a judicial foreclosure state. So in order to foreclose, you have to file a lawsuit. From what I can tell, I've never talked to Zillow about this personally, but from what I can tell is pre-foreclosure means a suit has been filed.
Yep.
Because Zillow has no idea if you're making your payments with your lender or not.
Correct.
So suit has been filed, but the property has not been transferred to a lender through the judicial foreclosure and sheriff sale process. If it sells to a third party, Zillow is not going to list that as a foreclosure that you can go take a look at.
Yep.
So from my experience, just looking at it on properties I was working on or with, it is after suit's been filed before the lender takes it back. So nobody to call in that scenario because those people probably aren't going to want to talk about it. A good tip is if you find a property that you're interested in purchasing and you see that pre-foreclosure listing, step one, pull the tax bill. See who the names are on the tax bill.
Yes.
Yep. Step two, go to CCAP, which in Wisconsin we're very fortunate to have. Most states don't have that, or if they do, it's nowhere near as good. CCAP is a great tool. Type in the name on the tax bill and see if a foreclosure action pops up. If it does, then you can kind of generally figure out the time frames if you know what the time frames are. But you can see if judgment's been entered or if they're arguing about it and fighting it, or if there's going to be or if there's been a sale recently. You can figure those things out. So that's some of the research you can do. And what I'll tell you is that if you see a pre-foreclosure house and you type in on CCAP and it turns out that person has passed away and there's a pending estate and there's estate proceedings, now there might be somebody you could call. You could call the attorney that started the probate, or you could call the personal representative that's listed and say, hey, I see what's going on here.
Yep.
Is there any way we can talk about, a way to buy this property?
Yeah.
Obviously, as you know, each property is very unique. So just because while it was listed or when they were trying to do it informally, somebody didn't want to buy that property for, say, $150,000, doesn't mean that the neighbor doesn't want to, or, somebody that needs it specifically for a specific purpose. And of course, the more unique the property, the more likely that is.
Yep.
But that's when it's worth a call. It's not worth a call to somebody who's living in it, who wants to keep living in it.
Right.
And really probably not all that nice to bother them. But it's, you can keep your eye on it.
Right. So okay, so correct me if I'm wrong here. So, and what do you call it? So it's actually like a lawsuit is fought. Not a lawsuit. It's a.
It is a lawsuit.
It is okay.
In Wisconsin, it's a lawsuit. In Michigan, they have what's called foreclosure by advertisement.
Yeah.
So if everything goes smoothly, there is no court intervention.
Sure.
In a lawsuit. But in Wisconsin, it's plaintiff first defendant. You name the borrower, you name any other lien holders that are junior to your position.
Sure.
You serve it with a process server, and you file motions with the court, just like any other type of lawsuit.
Now, my understanding is this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there could be like a redemption period.
Yes.
Of a year.
Every
6 months to a year.
Every single time there will be a redemption period, unless it's waived by the borrower. And again, usually that's going to be in a death or decedent situation.
Yeah.
But yes, every single time there's a redemption period. So once judgment is entered, if the mortgage was signed on or after April 26, 2016, the redemption period is 3 months if the lender has waived the deficiency, meaning I just want the property sold, and if it sells for less than what I'm owed, I don't care. That's called waiver of a deficiency. But if you want to go for that deficiency judgment, which is relatively uncommon, but it does happen,
sure.
Then the redemption period would be 6 months. Now, if the mortgage was signed prior to April of 2016, it's 6 months if it's a waiver of deficiency and a year if you didn't.
Sure.
So you add that on top of the fact that a lender can't file a foreclosure action until 120 days after the first date of default. So we call that the 121 rule.
Yep.
With that, so I mean, there's 4 months there, and
Yep.
then you've got to file it, and then you've got to get it served, and then the debtor has 20 days to answer after they've been served, so that's usually another month or two. So, I mean, you usually don't have, and then you have to file for judgment, and some courts require a hearing, so you usually don't have judgment until about 6 months after that first date of default, which doesn't mean that the public was aware of that, but the borrower is. So when you talk about, are they going to be listed for sale? Could they have sold it? A lot of people are trying.
Yep.
You know, a lot of people kind of know that they need to get this thing sold. They can't afford it, either due to change in circumstances or due to just overreaching, and they're cognizant of it. And so they try to fix it by selling it. And sometimes they find a buyer in the middle of the process, and great. Sometimes they don't, and you wind up taking it through to the end.
Yep.
But they don't need to make payments during that time period. So a lot of borrowers will ride out the entire foreclosure process because, well, it's living, essentially for no cost for a year or more. And so the savvy person in that scenario will squirrel away that money and use it for the next down payment or for rent.
Yep. Right. Yeah. No, and it's kind of interesting. It jogged my memory because I've worked with sellers that, I one case comes to mind where a couple years ago, the owner had passed away. The son kind of jumped in, and we tried to sell the house, but with the mortgage that was out there and the commissions and fees, like we couldn't quite make it work for everything. So at that point, we just kind of, they just let it go back to the bank.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately that's going to happen if it's going to be something that would be viewed as a short sale, is the term. Short sale means the net proceeds from closing after all the costs and fees are paid are going to be less than what the lender is owed.
Yep.
So the lender has to approve that. Otherwise, the lender isn't going to satisfy its mortgage and legally wouldn't be required to do so.
Yep.
So it would still be a lien, when the buyer picks it up. So if the purchase price isn't going to be high enough, the lender either has to consent to that or it's not going to happen.
Yep.
And that's the real concern is, a lender could do it. I mean, if it's going to be a $5,000 or $10,000 haircut for the lender, financially they're better off.
Right.
But there are other considerations like, intervening liens, for example. I mean, if there's not going to be a foreclosure and there's not enough money to pay off that $5,000 credit card judgment, well, then buyer's not going to want to buy it. There's real estate taxes as well. And then, of course, if the loan has been sold to the secondary market,
Yep.
There are additional requirements that those folks have in order to prove a sheriff sale. So prove a short sale. So everybody thinks we'll just do a short sale. All I need to do is get one lender to say okay, and we're good. That's not the case. It's a lot harder than that.
Right. Okay, so let's use the example. So let's say that, so a property is it's out of the pre-foreclosure state, right? So give me an example. So let's take it all the way through, like the redemption period is issued, whatever it is, 3, 6, 12 months. And during that time, I guess you'd say the owner of the property wasn't able to make amends, right?
Sure.
So then at that point, what happens then?
So once that redemption period expires, and that's after judgment's been entered, so foreclosure's been ordered by the court, the redemption period runs, and during that time, the borrower, if they can go get funds to pay off the balance and keep the home.
Yep.
It unfortunately does not happen all that often, and they don't have the right at that point in time to just pay the catch-up payments because the loan has been accelerated. So the whole thing's due now, especially once you're in the redemption period. So you can't just say, oh, I'm only 9 payments behind. Here's 9 payments. We're good, right? That can happen if the lender is in agreement to allow it to happen. And a lot of times if you've lost a job and now have it, and the lender's aware of that, and you've communicated with them. That's always key for anybody in that situation. Communicate with the lender. If the lender's aware of that, a lot of times they'll say, sure, yeah, we'll give you another shot.
Sure.
But if you don't communicate, they'll never know that.
Yep. As a side note, sorry to interrupt, but is that why? Because a lot of times people want their mortgage service locally. Like they don't always want it to go to a secondary market, which makes sense because who wants to deal with what's an example? Some of these big companies.
So a secondary market's going to be a Fannie Mae, a Freddie Mac, or similar products that are kind of under those two giants. But even if it goes to that secondary market, if you used a community bank or a credit union to finance the transaction, they're what's called a servicer.
Sure.
So you'll still deal with them, even though they're not the quote owner of the loan anymore.
Sure.
They have a servicing agreement with whoever purchased that loan. So that's who you'll still work with. They will treat you as their customer, and they are, and you are, but there is something on the back end, and that's almost 100% of the time the case. Maybe that's 80 to 90% of the time. If you have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage and you obtain that loan locally, it has probably been sold to the secondary market. Not always, and like I said, there's lots of different products. It's not always a Fannie or a Freddie deal, but. What people usually should mean when they say, I don't want it to go elsewhere, is if you use a huge national bank, that's, in all 50 states or something like that. If you do that, now you don't have that individual person that you can just easily call and say, hey, Joe, I didn't make my payment, but I need some help. And you've got that guy's number, and he knows who you are. You're not calling a call center, I guess, is my point, when you stay local. And so that's usually, I tell people, look, if you're talking about just your own personal residence, I don't know why you'd want to use somebody that you couldn't just call very easily, because usually it's easier to work with those people. So, that's, and I know a lot of people do. And I will say, in Wausau, there's a lot of really great people that you can contact that will help you with that. So we're fortunate in that regard. If you if you live in a bigger city, I think it's maybe a little bit harder to find that community bank because it's, you're living in Milwaukee. There are community banks in Milwaukee, but it's a little harder. And that's, also sometimes why people like the credit union, because the credit union model, even if they're a super large credit union, is more, local and community based. So that's why the credit unions and the community banks on the residential side, can be very similar in terms of customer service, depending on where you are.
Right. Yeah. Great. So, and I kind of cut you off there when I asked about that, but it was just it was a question that came up to my mind. So, back to our example when we, so the buyer is not able to make amends, right? And they in their redemption period.
Right. Yeah. So if they're in the redemption period and it expires, so 6 months is done. Then the lender will publish the sale of the property. So you call the sheriff, you schedule a sheriff sale, and then it's published in a newspaper for a couple of weeks. It's on the sheriff's website, and then it goes to that sale. And if at that time, there's no bankruptcy filings or anything like that to stop it, then either a third party comes in and outbids the lender. The lender has to bid first. And either somebody comes in and outbids them or they don't. If you do outbid the lender, you do need 10% in cash or a cashier's check. We call them readily negotiable funds. So if you do plan on going to the sheriff's department and bidding on, say, $100,000 property, you need to have $10,000 on you and more if you get in a bidding war.
Sure.
So a lot of, sometimes people will bring a $10,000 cashier's check and a couple grand in cash.
Yep.
It's not a super comfortable feeling to walk in and out of a courthouse with tens of thousands of dollars on your person. There are deputies around. If you ask them for help, I'm sure they'd be happy to walk you to your car. But don't show up with 20 grand in cash, feel uncomfortable, and blame me.
Right.
Those are just, and I've seen people be the successful bidder and not have the money on them.
Sure.
And it gets put right back up on the auction block and it starts over.
Yep.
And people lose out on that. So if you are in that situation, remember to make sure that you have 10% in funds on you at that time. It doesn't matter if it's back at your office or your house.
You need it on you.
That minute.
Yep.
They check. So
yeah. Cashier's check, you should probably bring like a cashier's check for X amount and then have a certain amount of cash.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can do that, or you can just decide, hey, look, I'm not going to bid more than 50 grand on this property.
Yep.
And so even though the bidding might start at 40, you need to pay it all eventually. So, rounding up is not a bad idea. You get credit for it. It's not like you need to have exactly 10%.
Makes sense.
So if you've got 15 or 20%, you're in good shape.
Right.
So it's best to err on the high side.
Nice. So, okay, because I've actually never been to a sheriff's sale before. So have you, and just out of curiosity, have you ever gone like for a client or with a client?
Oh, yeah, I've been to many.
Oh, you have? Okay,
yes,
cool.
I've been to many, both with and without clients.
Have you ever, now, and this is in my mind, right? This is what I think it looks like, is someone from the bank, a representative from the bank has to be there. And so the bank bids first. Mm-hmm. That's super interesting.
Yeah. So they use back in the day, they used to do them on the actual courthouse steps.
Okay.
So those days are gone. They're inside now. But the sheriff shows up and reads the caption of the case and asks for the opening bid.
Yep.
And so the lender representative makes the opening bid. Usually, especially if you're not worried about a deficiency judgment or a property being really upside down or underwater, usually you bid your balance. So if you're owed 100 grand of principal, 5 grand of interest, and 2 grand of fees, you're going to bid 107. I think I did that math right. And,
yeah.
And then you're going to bid 107, and they have to go up in $100 increments. So if somebody bids 107.1, nobody else outbids them, it's theirs.
Okay, so let's use an example, right? So, and probably most of the time, I'm just guessing here, right? Most of the time, the balance or that first bid from the lender is probably going to be the highest bid.
I went 10 years without being outbid. So I used to tell clients I'm batting 1,000.
way.
I was undefeated.
Are you serious?
Yeah, not great for the client, but yeah, I was undefeated. Yeah, never had anybody else come in and bid.
Really?
Yeah, and then about 18 months ago or so, all of a sudden we started seeing a lot more activity on the bidding side.
Wow.
And I think it was because the real estate market was picking up.
Yep.
And people were getting back into, and there are people out there that do it.
Yep.
Flipping the house.
Yep.
So I'm going to buy it. I'm going to fix it up. Maybe I'm going to rent it for a little bit. Maybe I'm not, and I'm going to turn a profit on it. There's some people out there that do very well doing that.
For sure. Are you buying these in a personal capacity or more of a?
I have never purchased one myself.
Okay, sounds good because I'm just curious because I'm like
I did look into it on 2 occasions, and it's just one of those things where vacant land is different and easier. I mean, I've seen enough. I've seen enough of the horror stories.
Right.
So it's I would be concerned about doing it myself, but I'm also. I know how to swing a hammer, but not many other things. So, I think if you're going to do something like that, being very handy is certainly helpful.
For sure.
I look at that and I go, I would need to ask somebody else to do this for me. So maybe I shouldn't do it.
Keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, no, I was just curious. I was like, man, maybe Justin's got this like huge real estate portfolio that nobody knows about. It's
my secret portfolio does not exist, or at least so that's what I want you to think.
Right. No, that's awesome. So okay, so that's super. So a lot of times now here's a question: can the lender? Let's use an example. A house is worth 100, right? I go and look at it. I'm like, hey, in as is condition, this is worth 100,000, right? That's what it'd sell in the marketplace. It's worth 100, right? The lender owes 80, or the lender
is owed 80.
Is owed 80. Yeah. And so let's say that's it, just 80,000, just make it clean. So the lender goes and bids 80,000, right? And hey, this could be a realistic example, right?
Sure.
Someone could say 80,100. Can the lender at that point make another bid.
They can, and we've done that. And usually you're going to do that because you have a deficiency judgment that you sought. So in your example, I mean, just use those numbers, forget the ratios, $80,000. Let's say I was owed 100, but let's say I knew that if I bid 100, I was never going to get a third party interested.
Sure.
So I might bid lower knowing, well, if I take it back, I can get a judgment for the 20. And it doesn't matter what I sell that property for later. So I could hold on to it for 6 months and sell it for, let's say the market just improves dramatically. I could sell it for $130,000. I get to keep that extra money as the lender, and I still have the judgment against the borrower. Now, most lenders aren't that cutthroat.
Sure.
Especially community banks and credit unions. They're not really looking to do that unless they've taken other losses from that person.
Sure.
So and you could have a long-standing relationship that has completely gone sideways with several different commercial debts, consumer debt, credit card, vehicle, all that, to where you go, I need to start getting some money back because we're losing big off of this one particular customer.
Yep.
But if it's not a situation like that, it's not. They're usually not going to go out of their way to do that. And let me be clear, that is rare.
Yeah.
Because most people that are buying something from a lender know why and how the lender got the property and aren't really interested in giving them a huge premium, again, unless they really need that property.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm trying to get a monopoly on this corner. So I mean, I need this. I need North Carolina in order to complete the greens, right? So
that's awesome.
I mean, in order to do that, I've got to buy that gas station or that diner or whatever it is.
Right.
Again, a little bit more likely on the commercial side. When it's residential, most residential properties aren't all that unique.
Sure.
I mean, they might be to the person living in them, but to the general marketplace, it's mainly the same thing unless it's in a neighborhood where there's no houses for sale.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean that's where you typically so that's how that typically works. Bank can outbid, but I'd be surprised if anybody was really doing that right now, and if you did, expect to get the house back, because I don't think a third party bidder is really interested in getting in a bidding war with the lender.
Sure. So here's a question for you. When you were batting 1,000, because a lot of times you work with litigation of banks or of mortgage, right?
Right. Yep.
What's the definition, like the formal definition of litigation?
Litigation is really, I mean, it's the fancy word for a lawsuit.
Sure.
So when you're in a lawsuit, you are litigating. Somebody who an attorney that files lawsuits and takes them to trial, and all of that is typically referred to as a litigator.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, litigation, lawsuit, foreclosure action, they're all synonyms.
Sure. Got it. Okay. So when you were batting 1,000, were you, because you've represented the banks in these at the sheriff's sale?
Correct. Yes.
And then is that mostly who you work with when you're at the sheriff's sale, or have you also represented like a potential interested buyer, or both?
I have represented an interested buyer on a handful of occasions where I wasn't involved on the lender side.
Sure.
And usually they just kind of go in and bid it themselves.
Yep.
So I just coach them through and explain a lot of what I just talked about today to say, this is the process, this is where you need to be, these are the things we need to check before you go in there.
Yep.
But if you're comfortable with all of these things and you understand the risks, here's what you should do.
Right.
And be prepared to bid.
Yep.
And I did that, and I've had that conversation with people, and a lot of times they go in and they go, it was too high.
Yep.
So which is, smart. You vetted it out. You decided it wasn't for you. I've had one person that I've been. I mean, most of the time, those people don't get lawyers.
Yep.
But I did represent somebody who did wind up buying it. And the interesting thing was there was an IRS tax lien on that situation, which throws a whole nother wrench into the machine.
Sure.
Because the IRS has a 120-day post-sale right of redemption. So you could be the successful bidder. You've got to go through the confirmation process. You've got to pay the money down. And the IRS, in theory, could say, hey, you know what? We actually want that property. It happens almost never. Because the IRS is usually more interested, because they recognize too. I mean, they don't just get it,
right? So
they'd have to pay the money back to the buyer, or pay off the lender, or whatever. So I mean, there's usually not enough equity for them to care, and then they got to turn around and market it. Not really the business the IRS is in.
Yep.
So it's not something that happens commonly. But if you owed enough money to the IRS and you had enough equity in some nicer properties, I'm sure they do it.
Sure. So for our listeners, right, just going back a couple steps. So before you even step foot on the sheriff's, you go to the county. Before you even step foot, you said something that was really good. For a couple $100, you can go to the title company and say, and we typically call it like a search and hold,
Sure.
Or is that similar?
So if you wanted to, I mean, we call them, I mean, I just get a letter report.
Yeah.
A letter report is usually about $100, and they can tell you if there's any liens, if there's any outstanding taxes, who is the titled owner, borrower, and that's usually what that's going to tell you. It's going to give you the legal description too, which is the technical way of describing something that you would maybe refer to as 123 Main Street.
Yep.
There's a much longer version of that the law considers the legal description.
Lot 1 of Block 6 of the
northwest corner of the northeast corner.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so most people don't. I mean, I don't know what my legal description is other than if I pulled the deed and looked, right? So most people don't know that, and it's really not all that relevant, and except to make sure that you're buying the actual correct legal. And that's what a surveyor works off of.
Yep.
If you're, and that's something else I always recommend. If you're going to buy a residential lot, I mean, a survey will give you information you don't otherwise have, but people think buying title insurance guarantees them that they have the lot they bought, and that is not what title insurance does.
Right.
So that's why there's a surveying contingency that most buyers will say, I don't need that. Well, if you want to make sure you're buying what you think you're buying, you do need that.
Right.
Because that's the only way you're going to check.
Yep.
And so I tell people, look, residential lot, probably fine, especially if it's been bought and sold more than once.
Yep.
But if you're, new development, or you're talking a larger chunk of land, or a 40-acre parcel, something like that, I'd get it surveyed.
Yeah.
It's gonna cost a little bit of money, but if you don't get what you think you're buying, it's gonna cost you way more money.
Oh, that's so interesting. Though I just think that's such a good topic, and we can let's transition into title insurance in like just a couple minutes. Me and Justin, these are like really interesting topics for me, so we could talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah.
Let's talk
Are
about
we real estate geeks? Is that our deal?
I think that's exactly right.
I think we are.
Let's table the title insurance for just a second. So title company gives you again, going back to our example, hey, here's the could be you call it a letter. So it could be it could be just like a basic report saying, hey, here's the legal, here's what we found on the property, here's the owner, and if there's any would they even give you exceptions at that point?
No. So the exceptions are to the insurance piece of it.
Got it. Okay.
So the insurance is what costs more, because if there is an error or there is something that pops up or they miss something, then they take care of that. That's what you're buying insurance over.
Yep.
If you're just a checking letter is another thing people call it, checking letter, what that does is it gives you a lot of the same information that a title insurance commitment will.
Sure.
But it doesn't insure over or provide you any financial protection.
Sure.
So if it's really just for information purposes only, I want to know what's up with this property.
Yep.
You can walk into a title company, you can give them $100, and they will do some homework for you.
Got it.
And you can feel comfortable knowing that they're better at looking at that than you are.
Right.
So that's why it's worth doing if you're very interested.
Yep.
When you get to the actual purchase, now sheriff sale is different, but if it's a regular purchase, there will be title insurance, and they will formalize that.
Yep.
And if you're using traditional financing, there's a lender's policy and there's an owner's policy.
Yep.
So there's a lot of homework that goes into all of it. And one of the things I do in my practice is title curative work. So what that means is, some other bank or credit union somewhere else decides they need to foreclose, and when they run their title for foreclosure, they go, there was an error in, we don't have the right signatures on the mortgage, or we don't have the right legal description, or, there was a mistake. We need to fix it. Ship it off to a lawyer who will likely need to file another lawsuit to have a judge order that it was an error and have it fixed on the record, of title for the property, which is what is searched by the title companies.
Yep.
So if there is an error and you discover it as the owner or the lender, that's when you can make a claim on your title insurance policy. I don't see it happen often locally. I see the title insurance claims that I see are usually out of larger markets.
Sure.
Usually from title companies that don't exist anymore, or things that were internet based. I think you can understand why that happens, right? It's a rush job. Nobody's paying as close of attention.
Right.
Locally, it's a lot more rare because you have actual human beings working in neighborhoods and cities and where they live, so they have a familiarity with it, and they know the lenders. Sometimes they often know the agents and the brokers. So it's a little more in depth.
Right.
I'd say a little more reliable typically.
For sure. So on a foreclosure, you don't get any title insurance.
Correct.
Yeah, you're just taking it, and that's why you get the letter, because you want to know, like, hey, what am I kind of getting into?
Correct.
Yep. And so, okay, now you're at the auction, you got your letter, you're like, hey, this is actually a clean property. Okay. Then you're like, oh, wow, this is good. I've done my homework. I know it's worth 100. Lender throws out their first bid at 80,000, and you're like, I don't have to make a huge margin on this one. I'm comfortable going up to 85. Okay. You bid 80. Let's say it gets bid up to 85, right? There's other people that are interested too, and you're comfortable at 85. It gets to 85. You get the bid. Okay. Then at that point, you need 10%, right?
Correct.
So you got your cashier's check, 10%. You give it to them. Okay. Then how does it work? How much time do you have to secure the rest of the funds?
So you, as the buyer, have to pay the remaining amount due on the bid plus a couple other fees and costs 10 days after the sale is confirmed by the court.
Okay.
So not 10 days after the sheriff's sale. You got more time than that. So yeah. So usually the confirmation is a hearing.
Yep.
And usually that happens 30 to 45 days, depending on the court's calendar, after the sale.
Sure.
And then you have 10 days after that.
Sure.
Now that third party buyer is going to know when that confirmation hearing is.
Yep.
You provide the lawyer will provide notice. So then you can go. Ideally you either are paying for it in cash out of pocket or have already secured some lender commitment.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're going in and you're going into a bank or a credit union and saying, hey, I have this date. This was my bid. This is what I need to do. And so the bummer for you is that if you haven't done enough homework or you think, well, sure, I'll just get a loan, and you can't come up with the money.
Yep.
On that 11th day after the confirmation hearing, you forfeit your down payment.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because, like, if you're and just a couple cautions, right? And you've said that, hey, if your plan is to go in there, put your 8,500 down and go quick secure a loan, not a good idea.
No.
Because who knows if the appraiser can't access if the bank says, hey, we need an appraisal, and hey, we need X this and this. Plus, then you're getting title insurance. Like, there's a decent chance that's not going to work, or something is going to be off.
If you are getting traditional financing and you only have 30 to 45 days to pull it together, as you well know, that's a tight schedule.
Especially when you can't get free access to the property. Yeah, for sure.
So
there could be something in there that they don't, even if you can get access, right? The appraiser might say, oh, you got a bad roof, we're not giving you the loan.
Right. So there's a lot of variables that could lead to that, which is why typically we see when third-party bidders are interested, it's usually on the lower end of the financial spectrum, right?
Right.
$50,000 property, $30,000 property. You know, I can buy it, I can put 10 grand into it, I can flip it and make a $20,000 profit.
Yep.
You don't see it if it's a $300,000 house. Not only do you need 30 grand down, you need to be able to come up with the other 270 pretty quick.
Right.
Now, not to say there aren't people that would do that.
Yep.
But that's a big chunk of cash.
Right.
For as is, where is, never been inside of it before.
Right.
And so the risk is higher.
Yep.
And so that we don't see that quite as often, again, unless it's on the commercial end.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. Cool. No, I love this. I'm like, so I've always been asked these questions as an agent, and I've never known, like, you put little pieces from here, so I'm learning a lot here too. This is awesome. So, okay, so you get the bid at 85, right? What things could come up on the property that didn't come up on that original letter from the title company? Could there be anything, or?
There could be, depending on when you get the letter.
Yeah.
So there could be intervening liens, right? If they're not paying their lender, they may also not be paying some other bills.
Sure.
And if that's the case, and somebody say you get that letter, 2 months before sale.
Sure.
In theory, depending on how long it takes, somebody could go file an $8,000 small claims action against the borrower.
Yep.
Get that judgment and docket that judgment before the foreclosure action. Well, after the foreclosure action takes place, but before it's yours. That could pop up as an issue. Foreclosures wipe out any junior liens. So they all go away.
Sure.
But timing could make it such that something is complicated.
Yep.
Now, and again, title insurance is supposed to help you with that. And I've had that happen where there was a 7-day window where a lien could show up, and it did.
Yep.
What do you do? So, sometimes if you're that third party purchaser and you don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars laying around like lenders typically do, that $7,000 judgment's going to kind of be a bummer, right?
Right.
So, you may have to pay it, or you may have to say, well, geez, what am I going to do? Go hire a lawyer to figure out how to fix this?
Right.
I may as well just pay it or negotiate it down. So that's the unfortunate thing that happens to people is it's an amount of money that it's not a couple hundred, it's several thousand.
Yep.
And they just shelled out a bunch of money. So maybe they didn't have that just laying around in the coffers, right? So, now you're in that, do I try to fight it? Do I just try to pay it?
Yeah.
And that's an uncomfortable situation for most people to be in.
So, okay, because I'm just, my head is going here. So if a contractor, right? So to me, like it's taxes, municipal taxes, IRS, like those are things you don't like, that has to be done, right? But if a contractor like, hey, I put this roof on like 3 months ago, no one ever paid me, right? Probably a bad example, but let's say 3 years ago, and he drives by the property, it's like, oh, no one's there. I never did get paid for that roof. He goes and files a lien. As a flipper, someone that's flipping, would that be something that you're concerned about?
There could be a lawsuit filed.
Sure.
So the way construction liens work are, they're very, very hyper technical, and a lot of people get them wrong, unfortunately. And there's a lot of contractors out there, and if there's any contractors listening, talk to a lawyer about how to properly secure your lien rights, because that has led to a ton of litigation. But if you follow all of the kind of the prerequisites, and then you're not paid, you have 5 months basically to file the first notice or to serve the first notice on the homeowner. And then you have 30 days to then do the second one. It's a 6-month process. If there's no construction lien of record within 6 months of the last time work was done on the property, there can't be one. Now, as a random third-party buyer, you don't know when the last time work was done on the property, but you can feel pretty comfortable in the fact that if this foreclosure process has been going on for 8 months, they didn't probably go hire a contractor. So construction liens would not be something I would be concerned about, especially after doing the checking letter.
Sure.
But remember too, if the foreclosure was done or the mortgage was signed rather in say 2010, and then a lien was put on the property in 2013, and then a judgment lien from a credit card was in 2016, and now that lender with that mortgage forecloses, that construction lien and that credit card judgment are gone.
Yep.
They're off title.
Sure.
Once the sale is confirmed. So that's why, and I mean, it really at judgment, but it's not finalized until confirmation. We have that sort of 2-part system in foreclosures. And by the way, if you ever look up a foreclosure case on CCAP and you see that the case is closed, that doesn't necessarily mean that the property has been sold. In Wisconsin, they're listed as closed after the judgment is entered because that's usually the end point of most lawsuits is judgment. But with foreclosures, there is that confirmation piece. So the court retains jurisdiction in order to confirm the sale and order a few extra things to happen. So I think sometimes people look that up and go, it's closed, it's done. That's not necessarily true.
Yep.
So you have to kind of look at the filings and see, was there any, confirmation or order confirming sale or confirmation order or confirmation hearing. If you don't see that, then it's still going.
Sure. Okay, so and I keep coming back to this batting 1,000, maybe because of my love of baseball. But so okay, you were representing the banks back then when you were batting 1,000.
Yep.
So that makes sense while you're batting 1,000 because basically it wasn't that like in my head I was thinking that the client, like the person that was buying the property, like me or you, right, just someone off the street was buying it, was always getting these deals.
No, it just means that we walked in, bid, and nobody else was interested.
Got it. Makes sense. Yep.
It wasn't a great thing.
Right.
But it did make for, I mean, obviously the individual people that I work with at the banks and the credit unions that are in charge of the foreclosure process with their particular institution would sure like it sold.
Yep.
So it always gave me a little bit of humor to call up because it's bad news every time, right? So I could call up and say, "Congratulations, you're the new owner."
Right. That's
I mean, so it's you try to soft sell it and get a chuckle. But there's everybody always wants. I mean, if that's your job, you want those properties sold because then you don't have to worry about there's a lot of accounting that goes on. There's a lot of reporting that goes on. Obviously, they need to market the property and all of that. There's additional expense.
Yep.
And they call it REO, real estate owned. They don't want an REO property if they can avoid it. So when they started selling, I had a lot of happy clients who, I'd get to call and say, "Hey, guess what?" Actually, I have a client who has been in the business for decades and had never had one sold at sheriff's sale. So I got to call him up and say, "Guess what? The streak's over."
That's awesome.
So he had a much longer 1,000% batting average than I did. But he was shocked. So it's it's one of these things where it's great if it happens, and then everybody, especially if it's a waiver of deficiency.
So what does that mean? Waiver of deficiency. Oh, wait. No, see, Austin was listening. That means that the bank doesn't matter. Like they don't really care at that point. It's like, hey, whatever is the bid, that's,
we just want the property sold.
we just want the property sold.
Or
right.
we're going to take it back and sell it. And so we're not worried about bidding less than what we're owed because the property's underwater in our minds, and then taking a $10,000 money judgment on top of the foreclosure.
Yeah.
So that's what waiver
public,
is.
Is that public knowledge?
Sure. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow. So there's like opportunities, like for someone that knows what they're doing, like there's could be some big money to be made.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
That's so interesting.
If you track these things, and there are people that do. I mean, there are
Yeah.
people that make spreadsheets for all of this.
Wow.
If you track these things, you'll see what lenders are foreclosing, what attorneys are working for those those particular lenders. So there's another potential point of contact.
Yep.
You'll see if there's a money judgment entered. I mean, there's all sorts of. And you can also every single document that's ever filed in any lawsuit is all public record. Some information every once. I mean, you have to redact social security numbers, for example. But,
Sure.
The lion's share of the information is all public.
Wow.
On the state court level, you cannot look at those documents online from your home computer. You actually have to go to the courthouse. Interestingly, you there use a computer to pull up all of the documents. So I'm not sure exactly the reason for that, but if there was if say you went on CCAP and you saw there was a Marathon County case and you really wanted to know what the details of it were because you were interested in something, you'd go down to the Marathon County Courthouse. There's a second floor office that has all of the records.
Yep.
And you go on the computer, you type in the case, and it looks just like CCAP, only you get to actually click on the documents and see them. And so on the federal side, we have what's called PACER, and you can pull every document that's filed. And you pay for it, but
Yep.
you can get it. So, but foreclosures are animals of state court. So you have to actually go to the counties themselves to see those documents.
Wow. This episode is so good that I might not even publish it. I might just keep this knowledge for myself.
Secret information?
Yeah, no doubt. That's awesome. So no, that's really good. I love that. I'm just thinking if there's anything else on the foreclosure side that I just have questions about. So no, that's been super helpful.
You always have to. I mean, the one thing I'd throw in there is the interplay with bankruptcy. I mean, a bankruptcy filing screeches this entire process to a halt at any
Sure.
given time.
Sure.
And it doesn't. Sometimes it'll just delay the inevitable.
Yep.
Other times it will actually. I mean, depending on how serious the borrower is, or if they've changed their circumstances, got a new job, whatever. There are I mean, I won't get into all of the ins and outs of bankruptcy procedure, but there are ways for a borrower to sort of fix the problem if they want to and have the means to.
Sure.
And of course, they're, again, depending on who they are and what their communications are with their lender, they could right at the end just say, hey, I can fix this. Give me one more shot.
Sure.
And the lender might just be willing to do that.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I've had a lot of situations where, day before sheriff's sale, we wind up coming to a deal with the borrower.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, I had one, it was on a commercial property. We got dozens of calls. The sheriff's department got calls. The clerk got calls. The clerk and the sheriff call me and go, what is going on?
Yeah.
It was a very desirable property.
Sure.
And, had it gone, it would have been a bidding war.
Wow.
And day before, borrower, decided they wanted to figure out how to work it out. Lender was willing to work with them. So,
Right.
I mean, that's a good, if anybody's listening and is in that situation, I mean, communication is key.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to pick your brain a little further on the foreclosure. So, you buy the property, meaning, okay, so you put your $8,500 down. I keep using this example. Put your $8,500 down. 45 days later, at that point, you're responsible for, covering the balance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then at that point, do you have to be nervous at all? Like, hey, is there anything else that might have came up? Like you buy, now the property's titled in your name.
Once
right?
it's yours, you're good to
You're
go.
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If there was any subsequent suits from any creditors of the person that was the borrower in that process, the property's no longer titled in their name, so
Sure.
it's not an issue. So that's why, I mean, if it's a higher dollar amount and you are nervous and it's your first time and you've never done it before, getting a title company involved isn't the worst idea because they can kind of help. Going and seeing a lawyer and talking to the lawyer about it is helpful.
Sure.
You can do your own homework. It's just you're never going to feel confident that you caught everything if you just are trying to figure it out yourself. I mean,
Especially if it's your first time.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, lawyers aren't magicians either, right? I mean, we need to, it's why they call it the practice of law, just like the practice of medicine. Things change, things evolve. You need to constantly be educating yourself, and you need to stay on top of things. And it's why, certain people that do, for myself, for example, I mean, the amount of time I spend talking with lenders about these very issues and all the other things that go into them. I spend a lot of my time in a week or a month thinking, talking, reading about these types of situations.
Yep.
I could not possibly imagine trying to come to this cold and do it with my own money, with my with my own potential liability out there without getting any advice and just thinking I found it all on Google.
Right.
It's to me it'd be a very scary situation
for sure.
So it's that's why I'm surprised people try it.
Yep.
But just doesn't mean things are going to go wrong. And so I've talked to people who have said, well, I do this all myself and everything's been fine. I go, you're just lucky.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Right. Exactly. Sweet. Well, thanks for joining, Justin. This has been a great episode. I've certainly learned a lot. I think that the listeners are definitely going to take a lot of information from this podcast. So, any last words before you go?
I hope you have me back. It was a lot of fun. I've been trying to, look at how to, kind of put myself out there a little bit, just like you've been doing, and you've been very successful with it. And, so when this opportunity came up, I figured this would be, a great way to do that. So, it's fun. And I'd love to come back and do it again. If anybody, wants, out there listening wants to talk about any of these things with me, I'm pretty easy to find.
Only $500 an hour, people.
Whoa!
No, I'm just playing with you. Oh man! No, that's awesome. No, but we'll definitely include your information on the. Oh, Justin's signaling to me. He's saying 1,000.
Well, I'm sure we'll use a coupon code or something like that.
Yeah, right. No, but we'll definitely include Justin's information on the show notes. And yeah, in my experience with Justin too, super good guy, super intelligent. I mean, as you can just hear by listening to him, you know his intelligence and his diligence. And it's super interesting. In the beginning of the show, he talked about his Chicago upbringing and how that worked towards his advantage. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's always nice to have that little added edge, I suppose.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks again, Justin, and everybody. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of the show. We'll see you guys next time.